Hello again, David Mayo here, MLive.com, Detroit Pistons beat writer. Here to discuss today the power forwards in our latest in a series of discussions about the Detroit Pistons as they head into their 2015-16 training camp beginning September 29th. The Pistons, when they hired Stan Van Gundy, they knew that they were getting a coach who wanted to play a 4-out, 1-in design, and they have had no personnel to fit the scheme as far as their starting lineup since Van Gundy's been here until now. Obviously, last year they had the mismatch of the big three to start the season, but now they're going with Ersan Ilyasova as the starting power forward, a stretch four in exactly the design that Van Gundy would prefer, and Anthony Tolliver, another stretch four who's familiar to Pistons fans because they acquired him last year in December, just after Josh Smith was released and just before the Pistons went on their big winning streak after Christmas. So the Pistons have much more of the personnel and design to play the Van Gundy style with the changes they've made here. They don't have a Tyler Hansbrough type. They lack a tough guy on the interior, which was kind of the one thing you were looking for in the offseason, was for them to make a move for a beefier power forward and be able to play a little bit different way. But it looks like for the time being they're going to sacrifice that in favor of being able to play a pure 4-out, 1-in style. That's also, of course, why they spent a little bit of extra money on Aaron Baines in the offseason at center, so they could always have a really steady presence in the game in the interior, because you have to have a good 1-in if you're going to play that way. Ilyasova's a very good player, a tough guy. He'll stick his nose into the fray. He's a good, tough rebounder for an undersized power forward, and he certainly shoots the ball out to the three-point line. He also does one thing that Van Gundy hasn't had in any of the four men that he tried to use last year, be it Josh Smooth, be it Greg Monroe, be it Anthony Tolliver. He shoots the mid-range shot. Ersan Ilyasova is not averse to shooting the mid-range shot, and he shoots it well. He's not going to create a lot off the dribble, but he can shoot the ball anywhere from beyond the three-point arc and it really is going to create a whole lot of opportunities as the Pistons. You can't lay off of him like you laid off Greg Monroe. He will take the shot if you dare him to do it. There is some concern about it's going to get tougher on the defensive end. Both sides of both guys, Ilyasova and Tolliver, will be targets for post-ups by opponents. The Pistons know that. It's one of the things you sacrifice when you decide to play this style. Marcus Morris, the starting small forward, who potentially could play some minutes at power forward too, to try and shore up this spot a little bit, particularly while the Pistons are starting the season short-handed. He also would be a target to be posted up. So again, that's part of the reason that the Pistons spent on Baines this year, to make sure they had a big body in the middle, even though Baines is not necessarily a great rim protector, that they at least had a physical presence in the middle at all times, because they probably won't ever have one at the 4 spot the way things are looking right now. This will be a position where the Pistons look to improve over the next year. They do have Ilyasova locked up for another year beyond this year, but Tolliver's on an expiring contract, so there will be some change here. Obviously, they could add a body at the position after Brandon Jennings is healthy, and they presumably make a corresponding reduction in the roster at point guard. You could do a number of things with that extra spot at power forward, and Stan Van Gundy is not really excited about the prospect of going with only 2 power forwards, which is where Eric Griffin, the camp invitee, potentially could come into play, the 3rd power forward in camp, as the Pistons list their players. He's a guy who did the same thing last year, signed a contract with a training camp contract with Dallas, and ended up with their D-League team, made a little bit of money. And for the Pistons' purposes, he's a springy guy, a rim protector, who potentially, if on the assumption he doesn't make the team out of training camp, which is the likelihood, potentially they could stick him in Grand Rapids, and maybe about the time Jennings gets healthy will be about the time that the 10-day contracts take effect in early January as well. So maybe he's a guy you could bring up and play the 10-day game with. Other guys you could play the 10-day game with and try and fill that spot, maybe by trying out multiple bodies depending on what's going on at that point in the season. But this will be a position where there's going to be some change over the next year as the Pistons decide what they're going to do in the long term. But they've done a lot of things already. They locked up Reggie Jackson. They got the small forward to help out Stanley Johnson in the offseason, and you can't do it all at once. This buys them some time. Ilyasova is a good, solid guy to man the position for 2 years if they need to go that route, and in the meantime, they can look for a long-term power forward and are better positioned to play the 4-out-1 in style, certainly, than they've been at any time during the Van Gundy administration. Yesterday, I meant to point out that I think, in the year of the horse, the Pistons think they had their horse, think they found their horse in Stanley Johnson, but, I had one prop and I forgot to use it, so that's why I went into writing instead of broadcasting, and, at my age, things start to go a little bit anyway, so see you back here tomorrow.